The sky that day was an ocean of blue, with just a whisper of cloud dancing lazily in the warm sun. The helicopter blades churned the air, slicing through it with a rhythmic hum. Inside, Rachel sat beside her husband, Richard, the billionaire, staring out of the window. Her eyes, cold and calculating, flickered over the lush landscape below, but her mind was far from the beautiful view. It was on Amina. Thank you so much for your incredible support. Your likes, comments, and shares mean the world to us. Before we continue this heart-wrenching story, I need you to do a little favor me. Please subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell for more story dropping daily from this channel. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Lagos, New York, London, or somewhere else? We love connecting with our global family. Now, let me take you back to what happened in the story. Amina, the maid. The young girl who had been in their house for just over a year now. Rachel had watched her every day, growing increasingly restless with the attention Amina received from Richard. The jokes, the laughter, the way he seemed to light up when Amina was near. Richard was sitting across from her, leaning back, enjoying the hum of the helicopter and the sight of the rolling hills below. But his eyes, those eyes that used to be solely for her, were now soft when they fell on Amina. Rachel couldn't stand it. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, but she forced a smile. "Do you think we'll make it to the mansion by lunchtime, darling?" Rachel asked, her voice smooth and controlled, though the storm inside her was raging. Richard barely glanced at her. "Oh, I think we'll be there in time," he answered distractedly, his gaze falling once again on Amina. Rachel's gaze flickered to Amina, sitting quietly in the corner of the helicopter, her modest dress fluttering in the breeze. The girl's warm smile, so genuine, made her stomach turn. Amina's beauty wasn't just in her face, though it was stunning. Her smooth dark skin, her bright eyes that sparkled with mischief, her graceful movements. It was in the way she spoke, how she made even the smallest of jokes feel like the funniest thing in the world. Rachel couldn't compete with that. No matter how perfect her outfits were, no matter how much she poured into their life together, Richard had eyes for Amina now. She felt her chest tighten as she thought about the countless times she had overheard Richard's deep laughter echoing through the house when Amina was around. How often did he look at her the way he used to look at Rachel? "Richard, can I talk to you for a moment?" Rachel's voice was tight now, but she kept her composure. Richard nodded absent-mindedly, barely giving her his full attention. "You know, I've noticed how much time you've been spending with Amina," Rachel said, her tone low and dangerous. She could feel the air in the helicopter getting thinner, pressing against her chest. She had to stay calm. "Come on, Rachel. She's just a maid," Richard said, not understanding the storm brewing inside his wife. "She's fun, makes me laugh." That's all. All Rachel heard was the word fun. He was enjoying her jokes, laughing at her every word. And it wasn't just the jokes. She could see the way he looked at her, the way his eyes softened whenever Amina spoke. His affection was palpable, like a thread that connected them, leaving Rachel cold and alone in the distance. But that wasn't what made her angry. It wasn't just the love, the admiration, the attention. It was the secret. Amina had something Rachel didn't. A beauty that she didn't have to work for, a charm that came naturally, and a lightness that made everything seem perfect. Rachel had tried to ignore it for weeks, to swallow the jealousy gnawing at her insides. But as Richard laughed once again, glancing warmly at Amina, it became unbearable. Her mind raced, heart pounding. She knew exactly what she had to do. But as she turned to look at Amina, who had been gazing out of the window, she saw the innocent smile, the carefree expression that was so far removed from Rachel's calculating mind. The girl didn't know how much danger she was in. Rachel's thoughts spiraled, but she forced herself to focus. She took a deep breath and then, without another word, stood up and walked to Amina's seat. The helicopter hummed, the sound of the engine vibrating through the thin walls. Amina turned to her with a smile, but before she could speak, Rachel grabbed her by the arm with a grip so tight that Amina gasped in surprise. "Rachel, what are you doing?" Amina asked, voice trembling, but Rachel didn't answer. She pushed Amina toward the open door of the helicopter. Wait." Amina's voice broke, But it was too late. Rachel, filled with rage, pulled her toward the door, her mind only focused on one thing: to get rid of the girl who had taken everything from her. Amina struggled, but the strength in Rachel's grip was too much. Before Amina could even scream, Rachel shoved her out of the helicopter. The girl's body fell through the air, spinning, screaming, as Rachel stood frozen, watching. The silence in the helicopter was deafening. Richard, startled, turned to see what was happening. His face drained of color as he saw the empty space by the door where Amina had been. "What the hell, Rachel?" he screamed, leaping to his feet, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Rachel stood still, her breath shallow, her eyes wide. The only sound was the pounding of her heart. I had to do it," she whispered, more to herself than to Richard. Her world had cracked, but she couldn't look back now. The helicopter turned, heading back toward the mansion, but Rachel's mind was in a fog. What had she done? She had killed the one person who had taken everything from her. Rachel closed her eyes, trying to shut out the image of Amina falling. She would never come back. And neither would Richard. The helicopter descended, and Richard's voice broke through her thoughts. "I can't believe you, Rachel. You've lost your mind. I'm calling the police." And just like that, Rachel's fate was sealed. She was arrested shortly after they landed, and the police took her away in cuffs, her life unraveling in the blink of an eye. The charges were clear: murder. Amina's beauty had cost her life, and Rachel had paid the price. But as Rachel sat in the cold cell, her world crumbling, she couldn't shake the thought: what if Richard came to his senses? What if he finally saw what Amina had meant to him? That was a secret she hadn't yet learned to unravel. And so, the story begins. The courtroom was filled with the scent of tension, the air thick with whispers and glances exchanged behind nervous hands. Rachel stood in the dock, her face a mask of cold defiance, yet inside, her mind was a storm. The words of the prosecutor echoed in her ears, each one driving the knife deeper into her heart. "You deliberately murdered your maid, Amina, out of jealousy and fear," the prosecutor had said, his voice booming through the room, punctuating every word with a weight that made the air seem suffocating. Rachel hadn't even flinched. She had known this was coming. She'd known the moment she'd pushed Amina out of that helicopter that she would be paying the ultimate price for her actions. But what haunted her, more than the accusations, more than the arrest, was the look in Richard's eyes. He had been there, seated just across from her in the courtroom. His face was grim, his features set in hard lines. Richard had always been the picture of control, but now, his face seemed hollow, as though the light had drained from his world. He couldn't even look at her. She could feel his coldness from where she stood, and it gnawed at her like acid in her veins. Rachel's mind drifted back to the last moment she had with him before everything spiraled into chaos. He hadn't known what to do when Amina had fallen. He hadn't known how to react to the pain of losing someone he had come to care for. She could see the brokenness in his eyes as the reality of her actions hit him. But she had never expected him to turn on her so completely. The trial dragged on. Witness after witness came forward to testify, painting a picture of Amina as the beloved maid. Kind, funny, and full of life. But that life had been snuffed out in an instant, and no one was willing to let Rachel forget it. But what they didn't know was that Rachel wasn't just guilty of jealousy. There had been more beneath the surface. Secrets she had kept hidden even from herself. Secrets that made her actions almost understandable, if only for a moment. Richard had spent every minute of the trial sitting silently in the background, as though he were a shadow to Rachel's every word. His guilt, his sorrow, was a silent weight that he couldn't shake off. Rachel could feel it. And it burned. She had once been the one he leaned on, the one he trusted, the one he thought would never betray him. But now, she had shattered that trust in a way that could never be repaired. The trial ended with the verdict: guilty. Rachel had been sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Amina. She could feel the weight of the gavel strike down like a death sentence. But even as the courtroom erupted in chaos, Rachel's thoughts were on one thing: Richard. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, the door to the prison now closing behind her, Rachel's heart broke all over again. But what she didn't expect was what happened next. Just days later, a letter arrived for her, sealed with a faint, delicate touch. It was from Richard. She ripped it open with trembling hands, reading the words that would forever change her life. "I'm sorry, Rachel," the letter began. "I can never forgive you for what you've done. But there's something you need to know. I've fallen in love with Amina. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but it's the truth. After you were arrested, I couldn't stop thinking about her, about how you treated her, about the joy she brought into our lives. What we had is gone now, and I can't live with that guilt anymore." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was reading. After everything, after her sacrifice, after the bloodshed, Richard had chosen Amina over her. She felt the ground beneath her feet crumble. She read the letter again. And again. Her eyes blurred with tears that she hadn't expected to fall. Richard, the man she had loved, had now chosen the girl she had killed. And as if that wasn't enough, he had married Amina in a quiet ceremony only a few weeks after her conviction. The world seemed to collapse in on itself. In her mind, Rachel screamed, but no one could hear her. She had lost everything. And now, Amina had everything. But even in the darkness of her cell, Rachel couldn't escape the one truth she could no longer deny. Richard's love was never hers to claim. It had always been Amina's. She sat there in her small prison cell, the letter clenched in her fist, a single tear trailing down her cheek. She had ruined her life, and for what? A fleeting moment of jealousy? A moment of madness that had led her to ruin? And now the one person who could have saved her, Richard, was gone. Gone to Amina, who had done nothing wrong except exist. What would happen to her now? The days stretched on, but she couldn't help but wonder if Richard would ever return to visit her, or if she would just fade away into the background of his life. The first twist of the story had been Rachel's crime. But now, as Rachel sat in that lonely prison cell, she realized that the real punishment was not just the years ahead of her in prison. It was the loss of the only person she had ever loved. But the world, as they say, is full of surprises. And Rachel hadn't yet learned that the story was far from over. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The dull routine of prison life became Rachel's new normal. The once beautiful woman, the billionaire's wife, now wore the same drab prison uniform every day. The luxury she had once known felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another lifetime. But it wasn't just the loss of material things that haunted Rachel. It was the emptiness inside her. Amina had taken everything from her, and in return, Rachel had lost her freedom, her family, and her place in the world. And now, Richard. Richard was gone, married to the very woman she had destroyed. Every time Rachel closed her eyes, she could see Amina's face, hear her laugh, and remember the way Richard's gaze softened when he looked at her. She knew it was foolish, but she still yearned for his love. The memories of their good times haunted her. Richard was gone, but the pain lingered, sharper than ever. However, as time wore on, the news from the outside world grew dimmer and dimmer. Rachel had resigned herself to the harsh reality of her situation, until one fateful day when the prison door swung open, and she heard her name. Rachel! The guard's voice echoed down the corridor. Rachel had learned to ignore the calls for visitors by now. No one came for her. But this time was different. This time, it was a voice she recognized. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be Richard? But no. When she stepped into the visitor's room, she saw a figure she never expected. Amina. Amina stood there, wearing a simple dress, her radiant smile as bright as ever. It was a stark contrast to Rachel's broken and tired appearance. Amina looked almost untouched by the cruel world, as though she hadn't suffered a thing. She was still the woman Rachel had pushed out of the helicopter, the one who had stolen Richard's heart. Rachel froze, unsure of what to say. The room felt small, too small for the emotions and guilt that crowded inside Rachel's chest. Amina, however, was calm, her eyes filled with a strange sense of understanding. "I came to speak with you, Rachel," Amina said softly. Rachel's voice caught in her throat. She didn't know what she expected, but it certainly wasn't this. She had imagined every possible scenario in her mind, but this, the maid she had tried to kill, sitting across from her, calm and composed, was the last thing she thought would ever happen. "Why? Why are you here?" Rachel managed to ask. Her voice cracked. She had spent so many nights dreaming of this moment, but now that it was real, it was even harder to comprehend. Amina's smile faded, and she looked down at her hands, folding them neatly in her lap. "I wanted to forgive you, Rachel," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "I know you pushed me out of that helicopter. I know why you did it. You were jealous." Rachel's heart tightened. It felt like 1,000 needles pricking at her chest. Amina's words were like a knife twisting deeper. "Why would you forgive me?" Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything I've done to you, you want to forgive me?" Amina leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Because I know what it's like to be hurt by the ones we love. I know you were hurting too. It doesn't excuse what you did, but it's the reason. You were lonely. You felt like you were losing Richard, and I understand that more than you know." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. How could Amina, after everything, show such compassion? Rachel had expected hate, anger, maybe even revenge. But this was something different. "Richard," Rachel whispered, her voice trailing off. "He's happy with you, isn't he?" Amina nodded slowly, her smile tinged with sadness. "Yes, he is. But it wasn't easy, Rachel. He grieved for you, for what he thought was his life with you. But in the end, he chose me because he knew I would love him without the drama, without the games. And I promised him I would never hurt him the way you did. I promised him I would be the one who stood by him." Rachel's heart broke. She had heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Richard had chosen Amina. He had fallen in love with her. And now, Amina was here, forgiving her. The betrayal, the lies, the jealousy. It had all led to this moment. And it was too much to bear. "You think it's too late for us?" Amina's question caught Rachel off guard. Rachel blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is it too late for you to change? Can you ever look back and see the mistakes you made? Because, Rachel, I see a woman who's lost everything. Her family, her place in the world. But you still have time. You still have a chance to make things right. If you want to." Amina's voice was firm, yet full of compassion. "I believe people can change. And maybe, just maybe, you can find redemption in your own way." Rachel stared at Amina, her mind racing. Amina had forgiven her. Richard had chosen Amina, but Amina was offering her a chance at redemption. Could she find a way to rebuild her life? Could she learn to accept her past and move on? The room grew quiet. The tension, the unspoken emotions, hung in the air. For the first time in months, Rachel felt something stir inside her. A flicker of hope. But just as quickly as it had come, it vanished. A sudden realization struck her. "Why are you here?" Rachel repeated, her voice shaking. "Why come to me now? After everything?" Amina stood up slowly, her expression softening. "Because, Rachel, I believe that even the darkest moments can lead to something good. It's not too late for you. It's never too late to find peace. If you truly want it." With those words, Amina turned and left the room, leaving Rachel alone with her thoughts. She sat there, frozen, as the door clicked shut behind her. The seed of doubt had been planted in Rachel's mind. Could she change? Could she find peace, even after everything she had done? As she sat in the silence, she couldn't help but wonder if there was still a way back, a way to fix the broken pieces of her life. But that was a question only time could answer. And time, as Rachel would soon learn, was a powerful force. Rachel lay awake on her narrow prison cot, the cold, dimly lit room pressing in on her from all sides. The sounds of other prisoners murmured in the distance, but it was the quiet inside her head that was the most deafening. Amina's words kept circling in her mind, over and over, like an echo that refused to fade. "It's never too late to find peace, if you truly want it." What did that mean for her? Could she truly change after everything she had done? Could the guilt ever be erased? Could she ever find a way to atone for the murder of a young woman who had done nothing wrong except exist in a space Rachel could no longer tolerate? Rachel felt a knot form in her stomach as she stared at the peeling ceiling. Her world was smaller now, But somehow the weight of her decisions had expanded to fill every corner. She had been a woman of privilege, a billionaire's wife, yet she had allowed jealousy and rage to consume her. And now, she was just another prisoner, forgotten by the world she once ruled. But Amina had given her a lifeline. She had chosen to forgive. And that forgiveness wasn't just a gift. It was an opportunity. A chance to reflect, to rebuild. To make peace if it was possible. The days dragged on after Amina's visit, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling of something stirring within her. The initial shock of seeing Amina, of hearing the forgiveness that she didn't feel she deserved, had slowly shifted into a deeper contemplation. Could she take responsibility for her actions? Could she rebuild herself from the ashes of her past? Rachel knew one thing for sure. She had to try. She wasn't the woman who had stood in that helicopter, shoving Amina into the abyss. She wasn't the woman who had let jealousy destroy her life. She wasn't that person anymore. The next morning, Rachel requested to see her lawyer. It was time to take the first step. She sat across from the lawyer, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her prison uniform. The lawyer, a stern woman in her mid-40s with short-cropped hair and a no-nonsense attitude, eyed Rachel carefully. "You're asking for a retrial," the lawyer said, leaning forward. "Do you have any evidence that can change the court's decision?" Rachel paused. She had thought about this moment endlessly since Amina's visit. There was no way to reverse the consequences of her actions, but maybe, just maybe, there was a way to show the world, and herself, that she had changed. "No," Rachel said, her voice steady. "But I want to do something different. I want to show that I'm truly sorry. I want to make amends for what I've done." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Amends? How do you plan to do that, Rachel?" "I don't know yet," Rachel admitted, her voice softer now. "But I'm going to try. I'm not asking for mercy, but I need a chance to prove I can be better than what I was. I need to find a way to repay the harm I've caused. It may take years, but I want to start now." The lawyer studied her for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "This is unexpected. You realize that the public opinion is going to be harsh, right? People may never forgive you. They may see you as a monster for what you did." Rachel nodded. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. But I want to start with the truth. I want to show the world that I'm not defined by one moment of madness." The lawyer sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'll look into options for a reduced sentence, but don't get your hopes up too high. The courts don't like this kind of public change of heart. But I'll see what I can do." Rachel left the meeting with the lawyer, her mind whirling. It wasn't a solution, not yet. But it was a step in the right direction. The road ahead was still dark, but for the first time in a long while, Rachel felt like she was walking toward something, toward redemption. As the weeks passed, Rachel began to reflect more deeply on the past. The jealousy. The betrayal. The loss. She had caused so much pain in her quest for validation. She had allowed herself to believe that love could be owned, that a person could be possessed. But love wasn't something to possess. It was something to give, to nurture, to share. Rachel spent her days writing letters to Amina. Letters filled with apologies, but also with gratitude. She thanked Amina for her forgiveness, for offering her the chance to change. And though Rachel knew Amina would never receive them, the act of writing was cathartic. It was a reminder that redemption wasn't about asking for forgiveness from others, it was about forgiving herself. Months later, the court convened again. This time, Rachel was not asking for a full pardon. She was not asking for a chance to leave prison early. Instead, she requested something different. "I don't want to be freed from the consequences of my actions," she said, standing before the judge, her voice strong. "But I want to be allowed to contribute in some way. I want to give back. I want to make up for the harm I caused." The judge listened, his stern face softening just a fraction. "Your request is unusual, Ms. Coker. You murdered a woman. There's no excuse for that. But I do appreciate the change in your demeanor. I will consider allowing you to participate in community service programs for victims of violence, if you truly want to make amends." Rachel nodded. "Yes, I want to. I'll do anything to make up for what I've done. It wasn't much. It wasn't a complete redemption. But it was a start. Over the next few years, Rachel worked tirelessly to help victims of violence, speaking at community centers, participating in programs designed to help women and children escape abusive situations. Her name, once synonymous with wealth and power, slowly transformed into something different. A symbol of someone who was striving to be better. But the true test of Rachel's redemption wasn't in the work she did, or in the public perception. It was in the quiet moments when she faced herself in the mirror, when she knew that, for once, she was on the right path. And then one day, she received a letter. It was from Amina. Rachel opened it with trembling hands, reading the words Amina had written. I know what you've done. And I know that you are truly sorry. It's hard, but I forgive you. What you've done for others has not gone unnoticed. You've taken responsibility. You've changed. And that is the first step to finding peace. Rachel sat back, the weight of Amina's forgiveness sinking in. She had started out as a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, but now, she was something different. Something better. She had found the peace she had been searching for all along. And as Rachel read the last line of the letter, she knew that, for the first time in a long time, she could finally breathe. Rachel stood at the small window of her prison cell, looking out at the distant horizon. The sky was streaked with hues of orange and pink as the sun began to set, casting a soft glow across the barren landscape. The days blended together in a haze of routine, but something had shifted in Rachel's heart, a quiet, steady change that couldn't be undone. Since receiving Amina's letter, things had been different. Amina's forgiveness had pierced through Rachel's hardened exterior, reaching deep inside, where her guilt and shame had festered for so long. For the first time in years, Rachel felt the weight of her actions. Truly felt it. The guilt wasn't gone, but it had transformed. It was no longer an overwhelming force that threatened to drown her. Instead, it was a constant, lingering reminder of the life she had once lived and the person she had been. And that person, she wasn't her anymore. Rachel had spent the past few years dedicating herself to community service programs, working with women and children affected by violence. She spoke openly about her past, not as an excuse, but as a warning. She didn't hide from her mistakes. She confronted them head-on. And though the pain of her past never truly disappeared, she had learned to live with it, to use it as fuel to drive her towards something better. But as time passed, Rachel began to feel an itch deep within her, a longing for something more. The prison walls, while they had once been a safe confinement, now felt like a cage. She had done the work, she had repented in her own way, but what else could she give? The answer came to her in the quietest of moments, a flash of clarity that cut through the fog of her thoughts. She needed to make a real difference. Not just in her own life but in the lives of others. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the first step in finding the closure she so desperately needed. It had been nearly 5 years since Amina's death. 5 years since that fateful day when Rachel had taken her life in a blind fit of jealousy. Rachel knew she could never undo what she had done. But she could give something to the world, a part of herself, a piece of her heart that she had once guarded so fiercely. She needed to reach out to Richard. It was a thought that had haunted her for years. Richard, the man she had once loved, the man she had driven away. She had tried to move on, to make peace with the fact that he had married Amina, but the truth was, she had never stopped loving him. She hadn't expected forgiveness from him. What she had done was unforgivable, but she had to try. For her own sake. The letter she wrote to Richard was simple, but it took everything in her to put her feelings into words. She poured her heart into it, expressing her regret, her remorse, and the deep, soul-crushing guilt she carried. She told him about the changes she had made, the work she had done, and how much she had learned over the years. But most of all, she told him the truth, that she had loved him and still did, even though she knew she had no right to ask for anything. Days passed, and Rachel waited anxiously for a response. The idea of facing Richard again, even through a letter, was both terrifying and liberating. She had no expectations, but she couldn't deny the hope that flickered in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, he would see the change in her. Maybe he would understand that the woman who had murdered Amina was not the woman she had become. And then, one morning, the letter came. It was from Richard. Rachel's hands shook as she opened the envelope, her heart hammering in her chest. The paper inside was crisp, the words typed in a neat, precise font. She read the letter slowly, savoring each word. Rachel. The familiar voice, even on paper, sent a chill down her spine. I don't know how to begin, or even if I should. What you did to Amina was unforgivable, and I've spent years trying to understand how someone I loved could do something so horrific. It's taken me a long time to come to terms with it, but I've had to live with the pain of losing her every single day. Rachel felt the tears begin to well up in her eyes. She had known it would be hard to hear, but hearing Richard's pain laid bare before her was more than she could bear. I've heard about the work you've done, about the changes you've made. I won't say I understand it all, but I see the person you've become. The person you are now is not the woman who took Amina's life. I know that. But it doesn't change the past. It doesn't change what happened. I still have to live with that, and I know you do too. Rachel's breath hitched as she read the next few lines. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment, she felt the world tilt beneath her. But I want you to know this, Rachel. I've forgiven you. Not because you deserve it, but because I needed to let go of the anger and the pain. Forgiveness is not about excusing what you did. It's about finding peace. And I found that peace. Not for you but for me. Rachel closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She had done it. She had reached him. It wasn't a love letter. It wasn't an invitation to come back into his life. But it was something. It was closure. It was forgiveness. I'm not sure what the future holds for either of us, but I believe we are both on our own journeys now. I don't expect anything from you, Rachel. But I wanted you to know that I've forgiven you. I hope you can forgive yourself too. Richard. The letter shook in Rachel's hands. She sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of his words sinking in. In that moment, something inside her shifted again. The guilt, the shame, it didn't disappear, but it felt lighter. Forgiveness, she realized, was not a gift she had to earn from others. It was something she could give herself. And in the stillness of her prison cell, Rachel made a silent promise to herself, to continue the work she had started, to never stop striving for redemption, and to honor the memory of Amina by living a life worthy of the forgiveness she had been granted. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long, and the scars of her past would never fully fade. But for the first time in years, Rachel felt a glimmer of hope. Her journey was far from over, but she was on the right path. And perhaps one day, she could truly make peace with the woman she had once been. If you are still moving with me on this story, thank you so much for your incredible support. Your likes, comments, and shares mean the world to us. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Turn on your notification bell, drop a comment below, and let us know where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from Lagos, New York, London, or somewhere else? We love connecting with our global family. Now, let me continue with the story. The years inside the prison walls had, in some ways, passed quicker than Rachel had expected. The days, marked by routines and hard work, were balanced by the quiet moments of reflection and regret. The letter from Richard had changed everything. It was more than just forgiveness. It was a moment of clarity that had shown Rachel what she needed to do. It gave her the resolve to face herself in ways she hadn't been able to before. She had heard many people say that redemption was a long road, that it was filled with hard work and pain. But for Rachel, it was more than just an external journey. It was an internal battle. Every day, she fought against the woman she had been, the woman who had let jealousy dictate her life, the woman who had let her ego drive her to murder. But it was also the woman who had learned from her mistakes, who had committed herself to change, and who had begun to embrace her own healing. Rachel knew she would never forget Amina. She could never undo the damage she had caused. But she also knew that she could try to make the world a better place, one step at a time. She had started with small gestures, working with victims of violence, and she had begun to rebuild the shattered pieces of her soul. One of the things Rachel had done in the years following her conviction was start a prison program for rehabilitation. She taught other inmates the lessons she had learned, helping them find their own paths to redemption. She focused on restorative justice and personal responsibility, showing her fellow prisoners that there was a way out of their pain, even if it was one small step at a time. The prison walls, once a symbol of her isolation, now felt like a place of transformation. The women she worked with slowly began to change as well. Many of them were locked in their own cycles of violence, but through Rachel's mentorship, they started to see the possibility of something better. But Rachel's true test came when a new face appeared in the prison. It was a woman who had been brought in for a violent crime. A woman who, just like Rachel, had been consumed by rage and jealousy. Her name was Nia, and she had a fire in her eyes that reminded Rachel of the woman she had once been. Nia was younger than Rachel, perhaps in her mid-30s, with fiery eyes and a strong, defiant demeanor. She had been sentenced for the murder of her best friend, a crime driven by jealousy over a man. She had taken everything from her friend in a fit of rage, and now, she was serving her time behind bars. The first time Rachel saw Nia, she saw the same self-destructive pain that had once been in her own heart. She saw the same storm brewing behind her eyes, the kind of rage that could turn someone into a monster. Rachel knew that Nia needed to change. But she also knew that it wouldn't be easy. She offered Nia a seat in the restorative justice program, but Nia was skeptical. She was angry and broken, unwilling to listen to someone like Rachel. Someone who, in her eyes, had caused a woman's death. But Rachel wasn't one to give up easily. She continued to reach out to Nia, offering support, guidance, and understanding. Months went by, and Nia's anger slowly began to soften. Rachel saw glimpses of herself in Nia, the pain, the guilt, the shame, and she continued to guide her, showing her that there was a way forward, even after the worst of mistakes. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks. Nia would lash out, retreat into silence, or act out in defiance. But Rachel knew that change took time, and she was patient. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult group session, Nia approached Rachel. Her face was unreadable, her eyes hardened as always, but there was a hint of something different, a flicker of vulnerability. "I don't know if I can do this," Nia said quietly, her voice cracking. "I don't think I can ever forgive myself. How do you live with what you've done?" Rachel took a deep breath and looked at Nia with understanding. She had been there once too. "It's not easy," she said, her voice gentle. "And I'm not going to lie to you. It'll never go away. The guilt, the shame, they'll always be a part of you. But you don't have to carry them alone. You don't have to let them define who you are." Nia shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "But how do I make it right? How do I fix what I've done?" Rachel paused. She had spent years thinking about that question. And the answer wasn't simple. You can't fix the past. You can't undo what's been done. But what you can do is work towards being a better person. You can help others, just like I've tried to do. You can change the future, even if you can't change the past. It starts with choosing to move forward. It starts with accepting that you can't undo the damage, but you can make a difference now. For the first time, Rachel saw a crack in Nia's armor. Her hard exterior seemed to soften. Just a little. "I don't know if I can forgive myself," Nia whispered. Rachel's heart ached for her. "Forgiving yourself is the hardest part," she said softly. "But it's the most important part. And sometimes, forgiveness doesn't happen all at once. It takes time." The next few months were a journey of ups and downs for Nia. Rachel remained a steady presence in her life, guiding her through the difficult moments and helping her find the courage to face her past. Nia didn't forgive herself overnight, but she began to understand that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a process. One day, Nia stood before Rachel, her eyes brighter than they had ever been. She had changed. She wasn't fully healed, but she had taken her first steps toward finding peace. "Thank you, Rachel," she said quietly. "I didn't think I could change. But you showed me that I can." Rachel smiled, her heart full. It wasn't about saving Nia, it was about helping her find her own path. Just as Rachel had found hers. As the years went on, Rachel's story became one of transformation. Not just for herself, but for the women she had helped along the way. She had found a way to make peace with her past, and in doing so, she had helped others find peace as well. And though Rachel would never be free of the pain she had caused, she had found something greater than freedom. She had found the strength to make a difference. And that, she realized, was the truest form of redemption. The sun was setting once again, casting a golden light over the horizon. Rachel stood at the window, looking out at the world beyond. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it. With courage, with grace, and with the hope that, someday, she would truly be free. The following years continued to shape Rachel into a new version of herself, one far removed from the woman who had once stood atop her mansion, her heart fueled by jealousy, rage, and the bitter poison of betrayal. Yet, despite the progress she had made, the haunting image of Amina's last moments in the helicopter and Richard's eyes, cold with disappointment, never fully left her. She had forgiven herself in some ways, but in others, the scars were permanent. They were part of who she had been and what she had become. And now, after all the time she had spent transforming, working with other prisoners, and mentoring women like Nia, Rachel had come to one conclusion. There was still one thing she needed to do before she could call her redemption complete. She needed to confront Richard. It had been years since Rachel had heard anything from him. He had gone on with his life, married Amina, and started his family. Rachel knew that, even though he had forgiven her, the distance between them was insurmountable. But forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. She had to face him, not to ask for his love or to bring their past back into the present, but to truly lay to rest the ghosts that lingered between them. It wasn't an easy decision. She had lived her life in a prison of her own making, but now she felt compelled to do the hard thing, to show Richard that she had changed, to prove that her redemption wasn't just a self-serving fantasy. She needed to show him that she could take responsibility for everything, not just the crime she committed, but the love she had once shattered. It was a cold, overcast morning when Rachel wrote the letter. It was simple, yet heartfelt. She knew that words alone couldn't undo the damage of her past actions, but she hoped they could be a step toward closure, for both of them. Dear Richard, I can't say what I know you've already heard. You've lived with the weight of what I did to Amina, and to you for far too long. I can't undo what happened that day, and I don't expect your forgiveness. But I hope you know I've spent every single day since then trying to become the person you thought I was, the woman who would never betray your trust, who would never destroy the bond we once shared. I know that you've built a new life with Amina, and I respect that. I never asked for her to be in the place she was. What happened, what I did, is on me, and it's something I'll live with for the rest of my life. I don't expect anything from you, Richard. I simply want you to know that I'm sorry. I am truly sorry for the pain I caused, for the love I destroyed, and for the woman I became. I don't think I'll ever deserve your love, but I hope one day, we can both find peace. Thank you for the chance to change. Forever sorry. Rachel. Rachel sent the letter, knowing that it could be the last step in a long and painful journey. She had made peace with her past, but would Richard? Would he be able to look beyond the woman who had once been consumed by jealousy and see the woman she had become? Days turned into weeks, and Rachel continued her work, her focus never straying far from the letter she had sent. But she had learned that true change didn't come from the outside. It came from within. She didn't need Richard's response to confirm her transformation. The work she had done in her own heart was what mattered most. Then, on a quiet afternoon, the prison doors opened, and Rachel was called to the warden's office. Her heart raced. What was this about? Was there bad news? Had something gone wrong? When she entered the office, she was surprised to see a familiar face standing there. Richard. His presence was startling, a living reminder of everything she had lost. He looked older, but the same warmth still radiated from his eyes, though now they were tinged with sorrow. Rachel stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do or say. Richard smiled faintly, his hands in his pockets, as though he were unsure of himself too. You came, Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and nervousness. I didn't think you would. I wasn't sure either, Richard admitted, his voice steady but soft. But I couldn't ignore your letter. I couldn't ignore the fact that you'd taken responsibility for what you did. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be standing here in front of you, Rachel. But I had to come. The silence between them was thick, heavy with years of hurt, yet under it all, Rachel sensed something shifting, a moment of connection. Not a rekindling of love, but a simple, quiet acknowledgement of shared history. "I'm not asking for anything, Richard," Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it to you in person. That I'm sorry for everything. For Amina. For you." Richard nodded slowly, his face unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he finally spoke. "You know, Rachel, I've spent years trying to hate you. Trying to make sense of everything that happened. And for a long time, I did hate you. But when I saw the work you've done, when I saw how much you've changed, I realized something." Rachel held her breath. "I realized that, in order for me to heal, I needed to forgive. Not for you but for myself. I spent too many years carrying the weight of what happened between us, and I can't keep doing that." Rachel's chest tightened. "But forgiveness doesn't change the past. It doesn't undo what happened." "No," Richard said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that surprised her. "But forgiveness allows us to move forward. It allows us to find peace. You and I, well, we've both been prisoners of the past for too long. And maybe it's time to let it go." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. But it was enough. It was everything she had hoped for. And for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of peace. "I'm glad you came," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Richard nodded, a slight smile on his lips. "Take care of yourself, Rachel. And, maybe one day, we'll both be able to move on. In our own ways." With that, Richard turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the hallway, but Rachel didn't feel the loss. She didn't feel the void she had expected. Instead, she felt something she had been yearning for: closure. The door closed behind him, but for Rachel, the next chapter had already begun. She had faced her past. She had sought forgiveness. And now, she could finally start living without the burden of the woman she once was. For the first time in a long time, she was free. Rachel stepped into the sunlight outside the prison gates, the warm air brushing against her skin. It felt different. Fresher, cleaner, as if she had shed an old skin. The world was still vast, still unknown, but for the first time, Rachel felt ready to face it. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know where the road would lead. But she knew that she would walk it on her own terms, with a heart full of the lessons she had learned. And as the sun set on her past, Rachel looked ahead, her journey of redemption just beginning. The days after Rachel's release from prison were nothing short of surreal. It had been years since she had stepped outside those prison gates, years since the world had felt so alive, so full of possibilities. But with that freedom came a heavy burden. No longer was she a prisoner of the past. She was free, but she was still bound by the consequences of her actions. She had spent so much time reflecting, trying to find some semblance of peace, and now she faced the real challenge: building a life. It wasn't just about moving on from the past. It was about creating something new. She couldn't change what had happened, but she could work towards a future she could be proud of. Rachel started with small steps. She had saved some money over the years, doing odd jobs while in prison, participating in programs that helped rehabilitate and educate the women there. With the little she had, she rented a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And that was something she hadn't had in a long time. Her days now were filled with finding a new rhythm. She wasn't the woman she once was, but there was still so much to figure out. Rachel had once lived for wealth and status. Now, she lived for purpose. Her first call after getting settled in was to the community service organization she had worked with during her time in prison. The director, a kind woman named Linda, had always been supportive of Rachel's efforts. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you." Linda's voice came through the phone, bright and welcoming. "How are you? How's the transition going?" "It's going," Rachel said, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders just hearing Linda's voice. "I've got a small place, and I'm figuring things out. I was hoping I could come back and volunteer. Help with some of the programs, if you'll have me." "I'd love that," Linda replied without hesitation. "We could really use someone like you. You've got the heart for it, and the experience to help others." That was exactly what Rachel needed. Something that gave her purpose. She knew she couldn't undo her past, but through her work, maybe she could prevent others from making the same mistakes she had. The thought of helping others, of being a part of something bigger than herself, filled her with a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known in years. As Rachel began to settle into her new life, she also started a weekly support group for women who had served time, focusing on those who had been incarcerated for violent crimes. It was a way for her to share her story, not as a tale of a fallen woman, but as one of redemption and growth. She wasn't just a teacher. She was a student, too. Every time she helped someone else, she felt like she was healing just a little bit more. But even as Rachel began to rebuild, the world outside was not as kind as she had hoped. The stigma of her past followed her like a shadow. People still whispered about her, still remembered the headlines, the billionaire's wife who had killed the young maid. The story would never truly leave her. It wasn't just the public's perception. It was her own perception of herself that held her captive. One evening, while Rachel was walking home from the community center, she spotted a familiar figure in the distance. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but as the figure came closer, she realized it was Richard. Richard? What was he doing here? He looked just as he had the last time she saw him. Older, more worn, but still handsome. His eyes met hers, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. Rachel felt her heart race, the emotions flooding her all at once. She had thought she was ready to move on, but seeing him standing there, in front of her, made her realize that some wounds were harder to heal than others. Rachel, Richard finally spoke, his voice soft. I didn't expect to see you here. Rachel nodded, her throat dry. I didn't expect to see you either. What brings you to this part of town? Richard hesitated before answering. I've been thinking a lot about the past. About everything that happened. I've been hearing about the work you're doing. And well, I wanted to see you. To check in on you. Rachel blinked, unsure of how to respond. You've been hearing about the work I'm doing? Yes, Richard said. I've been following some of the programs you've started. And I wanted to say, I admire what you're doing. I think you've come a long way. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he had ever acknowledged the work she had done to rebuild her life, and in that moment, it meant more to her than she could express. I'm just trying to make things right, she said quietly. I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect anything from you. I needed to be someone different. For myself. Richard nodded, his gaze softening. I see that. I see the change in you. I wanted you to know that I respect what you've done. And, Rachel, I've forgiven you. I think you know that. But it's also okay for you to forgive yourself. Rachel swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. I'm still working on it. Richard smiled faintly. I know. I think we all are. But sometimes, forgiveness isn't something you have to earn from anyone else. It's something you give yourself. Rachel felt tears well up in her eyes. She had spent so many years running from her mistakes, hiding in the darkness of shame, but standing here in front of Richard, she realized something. She didn't need his forgiveness anymore. Not the way she had once thought. What mattered now was the forgiveness she had given herself. You've always been a good man, Richard, Rachel said softly, her voice thick with emotion. I'm glad to know that you're doing well. Richard nodded. I'm doing better. I think we both are. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past between them, but not overwhelming anymore. It wasn't a resolution. This conversation wasn't going to fix everything. But it was a step toward healing for both of them. Take care of yourself, Rachel, Richard said before turning to walk away. As Rachel watched him leave, she realized something. She was no longer waiting for his love, nor was she chasing after a past that could never be reclaimed. What mattered now was her own journey. She had come a long way, and while the road ahead would continue to be difficult, she was no longer afraid. The chapter with Richard was closed. The chapter with her past was closed. The journey toward her redemption had only just begun, and Rachel was ready to face it head-on. Years passed, and Rachel continued to build her life. She became a well-respected advocate for prisoners' rights, focusing on rehabilitation and restorative justice. She worked with women who had been caught in cycles of violence, helping them find ways to heal and rebuild their lives, just as she had done. She had no illusions about her past. It would always be there. But it no longer defined her. One day, as Rachel sat in a meeting discussing the expansion of a new rehabilitation center, she thought back to where it all began. Where it all went wrong. The woman she had been was gone, and the woman she had become was someone she could be proud of. She had made mistakes. She had hurt people. She had lost love, but she had also found it again. Not in the form of a man, but in the form of helping others, of forgiving herself, and of building a legacy that was rooted in growth and change. And as Rachel stood in front of the new group of women who had just entered the program, she saw something in their eyes, a reflection of her own past, a reminder of where she had come from. And she smiled, knowing that the road to redemption was long, but it was a road worth traveling. She had finally come home. Rachel stood outside the new rehabilitation center, watching as women from all walks of life filed into the building, ready for their first day of a new journey. This center, her center, was a testament to everything she had worked for, everything she had overcome, and everything she still hoped to achieve. It wasn't just a place of second chances. It was a symbol of transformation, of the possibility that no matter how far one had fallen, there was always room for growth, for healing, for change. She could still remember the day when she first stepped foot in prison, broken and consumed by guilt, anger, and regret. She had been so lost in the aftermath of her own mistakes, unable to see beyond the walls of her self-made prison. But now, as she looked out at the women entering the building, she felt something she had never thought she'd feel again: hope. For years, Rachel had poured herself into the lives of others, helping them rebuild their broken pieces just as she had. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't just guiding others on their path to redemption. She was witnessing her own legacy unfold in real time. This was her work, her gift to the world, and it was more meaningful than anything she had ever achieved in her past life. In many ways, the center was the culmination of everything she had learned and fought for. It wasn't about undoing the past. It was about embracing it, acknowledging the mistakes, and using those lessons to create something greater. Rachel had found her purpose, not in wealth, not in status, but in giving others the chance to rewrite their own stories. As she walked through the doors of the center, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Linda, the director of the organization, smiling warmly at her. "You've done something incredible, Rachel," Linda said, her voice full of admiration. "This place, it's more than I ever imagined. It's a true testament to your strength and your heart." Rachel smiled, a soft but genuine smile. "It's not just me. It's everyone here. We're all part of something bigger." They stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the women gather in the lobby, laughing, talking, sharing stories. Rachel felt a sense of peace wash over her, a peace she hadn't known in so long. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She had embraced it, learned from it, and had moved forward with a purpose that transcended her mistakes. In the distance, Rachel spotted a familiar face. Amina. The young woman, who had once been the target of Rachel's jealousy, was now standing in front of the center, smiling and laughing with a group of women. Amina had come to the center many times to help with programs, offering guidance and support to those who, like Rachel, had once been trapped by their own pain. Rachel's heart swelled with gratitude. The years had changed both of them. Amina had found her own healing, just as Rachel had found hers. They were no longer enemies, but allies, partners in helping others. As Rachel approached Amina, their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. They both knew how far they had come, how much they had fought, and how much they had lost and gained along the way. "You're doing great things here, Rachel," Amina said, her voice full of warmth. "I couldn't have done it without you," Rachel replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You were the one who showed me forgiveness was possible. Not just for others, but for myself." Amina smiled. "We all have our journeys. Yours just took a little longer to start." Rachel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I guess it did." But as she looked at Amina, and then around at the women who had come to the center for help, Rachel realized that it wasn't the time it took to start that mattered. It was the willingness to keep going. And that was something she could be proud of. As the sun set, casting a golden hue over the center, Rachel stood there, surrounded by the people she had helped and the people who had helped her. It was a full circle, a beginning, an ending, and a continuation of the journey. And for the first time in a long while, Rachel was at peace. She had found her place in the world, not as the woman who had made mistakes, but as the woman who had risen from them. Her legacy wasn't just the rehabilitation center, the work she had done, or the lives she had touched. It was the story of redemption itself, a reminder that no matter how dark the past, there was always light ahead for those who were willing to seek it. The journey wasn't over, but Rachel had found her way home.